Yeah. You can sit over.
Okay, here we go. We're live.
All right, great.
Let's go.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, it's the Senate Transportation Committee. We're going to get started. We're sorry for the delay this morning. We have the chair of Government Operations, President Meza. Okay, would you like to present it to us?
Thank you, Senator Mazza. So the Senate Government Operations Committee took some testimony on sections 40 to 43 of S99 yesterday regarding particularly the language that would have not withstood an entire title of statute and all the rules associated with those titles for 2 years in order to implement a technology upgrade for the department. In hearing testimony from the department, well, first in hearing testimony from Legislative Counsel, some significant constitutional concerns were raised with the language, and I will let Legislative Counsel talk more specifically about those, but that's basically ceding legislative authority and legislative oversight to an executive branch, and there is an executive branch department, and there is a lot of both Vermont and US Supreme Court case law about how that is not constitutional. So in talking, we heard testimony from DMV and also from the Secretary of the Agency of Digital Services, trying to understand more about what the needs of the department are specifically and why they felt like they needed that sort of authority to not have the statutes come into play. And we heard from them, and then we asked that they work with Legislative Counsel to come up with an amendment that would meet their needs, but would also retain legislative authority to make and change laws. So I think that this statute, the amendment that you see before you, does that. It includes findings to explain why they need what they need and what they need. It's just to provide context, and these were all based on the testimony that we received from the department yesterday. And then it sets up a timeline for working in partnership with your committee and other committees, including the joint JTOC, the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, over the next 2 years to ensure that you and others understand the needs of the department in terms of statutory changes in order to implement their modernization project. So there are a couple of reports and conversations and deadlines in there moving out to April 30th of 2025. And again, Anthea can explain really more the details. She and Jennifer Carby worked with the department on this, and my understanding is that everybody's in agreement that this meets the needs of the department while also retaining legislative authority and constitutionality. So I can walk through it more, but I think Anthea is probably better suited to do that.
Sure.
And our committee has not had a chance to look at this. We did take testimony yesterday. I have sent it to them. But if you're eager to move the bill today, I would be willing to just have my name and whoever else on our committee has had a chance to look at it beyond the amendment. Otherwise, I would ask that we get another day so we can look at it this afternoon. But if you just let me know what you would like to do.
Everybody's on board with it. We're going to hear it.
You're going to hear. I mean, they're in the room. They worked closely with Legislative Counsel, and my understanding is that they are on board with it, that it meets the needs that they have for their project, and that it does so in a manner that doesn't set precedent for every agency coming in here and saying they don't want to have the statutes apply to them for 2 years. So
Okay.
that's.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay.
So for the record, Anthony Dexter Cooper from the Office of Legislative Counsel. And then just to refresh the committee's memory, what you have in S99 in sections 40, 41, 42, and 43 go together. So that's why this amendment is proposing to strike out all 4 of those sections. And that was establishing a process where the Department of Motor Vehicles is implementing the driver services module for their next phase of their modernization project could notwithstand all of Title 23, and we talked earlier this week about how that was very, very broad, to make changes related to driver services for DMV processes. In talking about this with you and with Senator Hardy offline, we had come up with an approach that would allow a narrowing of the notwithstanding and putting up some more guardrails to make what the DMV was being given as non-discretionary as possible, to not run afoul of Article 15 and the non-delegation principles.
So why is that? I'm just thinking we that issue around the constitutionality has been there right from the get-go.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking that I don't know. It's unfortunate that it's surfacing so late in the process, I guess is all I'm saying. I don't want to deny it. I'm very concerned about, and that was, part of my view on S5 was, the delegation of legislative authority. But so I'm very sensitive to that, although I guess I was looking at this in terms of what we were designing to do, and we weren't focusing on the broader implications of what authority we were actually giving up or transferring. So that's only my 2 cents.
So a couple of things to say there is, one, this language completely avoids the issue because it's taking a totally different approach. And 2, in listening to Commissioner Minoli testify yesterday and then having heard the brief conversation that you all had about this because you understand what the DMV is asking to do, the reason why it was as broad as it was because it's sort of difficult for the DMV to say, well, it's this section in this chapter and that section in this chapter, and this piece has to do with driver services here. And I think from the get-go, it could have been narrowed, and this committee just didn't have the conversation about narrowing it because you knew what the DMV was asking to do and understood that it wasn't like the DMV was going to be, deciding tomorrow that they were changing everything about the driver's licenses, that this was part of a 18-month, I don't know if you knew it was 18 months, but a long process, and then a point in time was going to have an implementation. So I think we just didn't have the conversation about the fact that it potentially needed to be narrowed and made less discretionary because you sort of understood that that was a factor. I will say with this language and listening to Commissioner Minoli testify in Senate GovOps yesterday, and then in talking to Commissioner Minoli and Jen and Deputy Commissioner Smith afterwards, it's not necessary to not withstand anything because what they're looking for is not to deviate from statute now, not to deviate from statute over the course of the next 18 months. They're looking for legislative buy-in on what the statutes need to look like at the end of that 18-month process. So they're not, and they can tell you this in a way better way than I can, they're not designing to implement outdated statute, which is the position that they're in now, like with the stickers. If they had programmed the vehicle services module to require those stickers, they were going to have to buy additional equipment. They were going to have to change what they were asking their contractor to do. And it's really about making business decisions and giving the General Assembly a heads up. Hey, we're going to need to change this statute in this way to promote efficiencies and optimize the services that are being provided to Vermonters. And that's what this language does. And it was interesting for me hearing the discussion from a different perspective, because I came away hearing that what the DMV was looking for was different than what we sort of originally thought that they needed.
Why are we deleting section 23?
because you don't need it anymore. So what section 41 did was repeal section 40 because it was time limited, it was just for 2 years. And then section 42 made changes to the authority that JTOC had, and section 43 reverted that authority back to JTOC's current authority 2 years later on July 1 of 2025. If you are not giving JTOC this additional legislative power, because you can't really delegate to JTOC because they're not the General Assembly, but you're giving them this disapproval process, you don't need to do any of that with this modified approach, which is telling the department, report on what you're thinking, reporting on what you're working on, report on the recommendations that you're going to be making to us about how statute needs to change. Will General Assembly make this commitment to let you know about our concerns in advance? And then the goal is by the adjournment of the 2025 session, any changes that need to have been made to statute so that they can launch the thing in August.
Bills introduced is section 23 is just changing JTOC's authority to construction, paving, and rehabilitation.
It's putting it back. So you need to look at section 42 to see how it's striking that out to expand the authority, and then it's adding it back in 43. And section 43 is effective on July 1 of 2025. So you don't need to touch the JTOC statute. And that's also why you see that the effective dates are modified slightly here, because you no longer need to have anything effective on July 1 of 2025.
Questions? DMV, what's your thoughts?
Thank you and good morning. So I appreciate everything that you just said, Anthea. It was a pleasure again working with you on finding a balance last evening on this. I think most importantly, and to Senator Kitchell's comments, our intent was not to change the executive branch authority and have over and ignore the legislative authority, which I think the notwithstanding to all of Title 23 is what was brought up. The language will work for us. It's important for DMV to have a working relationship and an ability, from what we learned from vehicle services, to advance and align best practices going forward. We will make business decisions and that may, because we don't know, we can't give you a list today, that may impact driver service statute. And we'll bring that forth, but we will also at the same time be aligning those recommendations and giving direction to the vendor on how to implement it into the system.
I have a sort of a broader question. Do we put too much detail into statutes so that, because a lot of things happen and you do it through maybe broad regulatory authority, because benefit rules get changed, et cetera, and you don't come back and have to change the statutes. So my question really becomes, as we're looking at this, maybe we are creating, I hate to say it, a constipation in the system because we have put so much detail that it in statutes, which is doesn't fit in a very dynamic work and business environment. And so I think it begs the larger question about how much we're stuffing in statute and how much we are giving sort of that broader policy, and then you put rules that can be updated consistent with that policy. It's an observation that I have in terms of the level of detail that we have stuffed into statutes. You agree?
Would you offer that constipation contributed to failed DMV projects in the past?
No.
I can't speak to that. What I can, we've had success since, I've been commissioner, registered deputy commissioner. But that has come from having our committee of jurisdiction work with us and be strong listeners. But there is, in general, as a commissioner and working in other departments, it is a statute that I have never experienced that is so directed on how we process and do our business.
I think you,
Oh, I was just going to say, while Senate Government Operations was most exclusively hearing testimony about this particular modernization project. One thing that ADS testified to is that of the modernization projects that they're working on, this one has the most sort of crossover with statutory restraints. And that's why you'll see language in here in subdivisions 40A7 and 8, bottom of page 2, top of page 3, that talk about how this project is sort of different. There might be implications in the Department of Labor project that's anticipated dealing with unemployment insurance, and that this potentially could sort of be a model for a partnership going forward. This language does not address the fact that Title 23 maybe should be updated to take out some of those details, but I think that that is a known thorn in the side of this project.
I mean, no disrespect to the work that you've done, but I just even think 4 pages of explaining what we're doing here sometimes is just awful wordy at times. And, but
Well, it provides, I would think, the context for why we're allowing this to happen within that legislative versus executive branch power relationship.
I'm still relatively new around here.
Yeah, well, forget it.
These constitutionality concerns are raised all the time, correct? So I mean, this is not necessarily unheard of that when we're proposing legislation. Do you feel like we should have done anything differently to catch those constitutionality concerns prior to now?
So it's interesting because this language, the JTAC process, has been put in prior bills. It was in the T bill related to when there was a thought that there might be some federal money that came in. The IIJA Act was enacted late enough in the year that there was not a need for the Agency of Transportation to modify anything with what they had programmed for, but there was language in a T bill that would have given them some authority there. This language, the whole concept of the disapproval process and the notwithstanding of, was included at the my sort of working with the DMV and the Agency of Transportation on both of their sort of first proposals of these bills. It was included in this bill related to the modernization projects. It was included in House Transportation's in the T bill related to the vehicle incentive programs, giving them the authority to deviate from statute and just statute there. When I told this committee about the language, you heard from the DMV and have known about the modernization project for a really long time and were supportive of that flexibility. When I told House Transportation about it in the context of the vehicle incentive program, they had a completely different reaction and they said, well, we don't want to give up this legislative authority and regulation, and the Agency of Transportation proposed to pull the language. I think that this language could have been narrower from the start to keep it less discretionary. But as I said, early in the conversation here, I don't think there was confusion amongst the people in this room as to the intent there. And when a different committee who doesn't necessarily know about how sort of scattered about in Title 23, the languages saw, notwithstanding all of an entire title, it wasn't, I think, intended by anyone, including me as the person who drafted it, to say they're going to ignore every piece of Title 23. It was a stand-in for the fact that it would have taken a really long time and been sort of prohibitively difficult for the DMV to say now, before they've started an 18-month project, these are the portions of statute that we think we might need to deviate from. But I'm going to go back to, it's not necessary, because now that I think everyone sort of understands the scope of the project and the timing a bit better, it just needs to yield a result where statute is amended before the project launches. At no point are they actually deviating from the law, they're just making decisions, business decisions, that would cause them to deviate from the law of law.
You have to report this, right? Okay. Well, I think it's important to state how the Transportation Committee perceived it, and which I thought Anthea has done a good job, because we have that detailed understanding of the project and so forth. And I think that's important that, our intent was never to just have wholesale disregard of that section of statute. But this does, I guess, probably formalize sort of what we might have had as our intent when we were using that language.
Yes.
So I'm not a lawyer by trade, not, they let anybody run for these offices, so I didn't catch these concerns when this was presented to us, but I've learned, and I will say this, the next time we see any type of language that wants to not withstand sections of law, I now know that this is something more to watch out for, so I've definitely learned something in this process.
Commissioner, the reports required in here, you know, size owners or.
I was surprised when I read them last night. I will accept those reports because this project is critical. And we will be able to, you know, my vision of what they will be is this section of law is what we're gonna be modifying. It may not be draft language, it may be the intent, it may be cleanup, but, you know, there's a lot of reporting in the middle of a modernization. I'm not sure if we need the dual. We could go with one that works with you, to be absolutely honest.
So,
If it is a way to communicate our intent and continue to.
Yeah, that could be a short report, it could be a sentence.
Yes.
and it could also be, we haven't discovered that there's anything yet that we think we need to recommend given. I will say that as the person who guessed on all of the reports and the language for when they were doing the timeline, without, you know, talking to the DMV in advance, because this happened late in the day yesterday. My thought process in just the timing of it was 5 months after they expect the 18-month design and implementation period to start. The December one would be right after people found out if they were going to be returning to the General Assembly post-election. And then the 2 joint meetings were just designed to tee off anything that was proposed for the missile.
I'm looking for Senator Mitchell. If you need a minute,
Yeah, I
we
do.
can wait, but yeah. Thank you.
Teeing off this committee's work on the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill at the beginning of the 2025 legislative session, and then late in the 2025 legislative session in case there's sort of a, oh no, we just realized that we really need to get such and so language into the miscellaneous motor vehicle bill. And I think those joint meetings could also be very short.
Yeah.
You have the
We're in the
ability.
building, yeah. Okay.
Frankly, they're gonna have to get back to us anyway if they're ready to do something, so it can be the vehicle to say, nothing needs to be done, or this needs to be done, and it doesn't have to be filled with text.
Why was this issue brought up in the first place?
What?
Where's it come, why was this concern in the first place?
Well, because for the person who didn't know what was being intended here, it appeared like it was a wholesale delegation of authority of a major piece of motor vehicle law that we were waiving or giving the authority to change. So,
And that it was going to be on an ongoing
Yeah.
process and not at the end point of this.
so that's, you know, so it was a separation of powers kind of issue, to be honest, and how much you were delegating.
And you can delegate, and the case law says it needs to be non-discretionary, and there are ways that you could have made the original language less discretionary. You could have narrowed it to particular chapters within Title 23, and Mike went through Title 23 yesterday and said, these are the chapters I think that could be implicated. You could require triggering language, you could have defined reasonable changes to be narrower, but I don't think any of that is an issue now with the different approach.
Okay, any other questions, comments? With all this, we accept the amendment?
Yeah.
Move on. Okay,
But there's a question, or whether we're gonna try to do it today.
Let's do it today, or,
Let's do it today.
yeah, let's do it today. Who wants to let Ruth know that we're gonna do it today?
So I'd let the editors know that this should be edited for the calendar for your floor time at 11, if need be. So I will
Who's
let.
gonna knows, like Ruth said, whether she's on it or another senator's on it, whoever's on it.
That's once we tell her.
Does she need to be on it? Does it want to be a committee amendment? Is that-
So it can't be a committee amendment from any committee because no committee has
but all
possession of
of
the
us
bill.
can sign on it?
Well, so,
We just say we view it as a friendly amendment.
and alternatively, you could also sign on. So it could come from the 6 members of GovOps or the portion of the 6 that want to be on it and the 5 of you if you also wanted to be on it.
Set this to-
Does not-
Doesn't matter to me.
Let it go. Let's just get it
So you'll
done.
find out who's on it and dress it.
Yeah.
Then we'll report where.
Okay, we were gonna go through the, but we don't have to do that this morning. You want to do it tomorrow morning?
The T-bill?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
That's good, 'cause I think we-
Not like you have that bill yet either.
no, that's not saying, we just, so we'll do it tomorrow morning, because we don't have anything else yet.
And it could change.
It could change.
Yeah, it's just- yeah.
It is in Ways and Means right now. That could be a significant change.
Yeah.
And I expect it to be in-house appropriations formally either this afternoon or tomorrow so that it can be on the House floor earlier.
Because it has to get out of appropriations by tomorrow to be crossover.
That's what we were told.
Oh, no, it doesn't because it is in this, it in and of itself is
Oh.
a money bill, so it is exempt from the crossover
Get out of
deadline.
transportation.
So if House House appropriations isn't able to, then it is still live.
Okay, that's all for this morning.